One might argue that if Orla had not been so hungry, she would never have given her last loaf of bread to a stranger. But then again, if the Alpha King had done a decent job of feeding his own valley that winter, she would have had a great deal more than one loaf left to give. So really, when one considered it properly, everything that happened afterward was entirely his fault. The bread, the marriage, every last crumb of it. It was the 4th week of the sealed granary. Orla was the last baker in Ash Hollow, which sounded grander than it was. It meant she was the last woman in the valley, stubborn enough to light an oven with nothing to bake in it, on the theory that a cold oven is a dead one, and a dead oven does not come back. She had one loaf. She had made it that morning out of the sweepings of the flour bin, 3 handfuls of barley meal she had been hoarding in a tin behind the salt, and water. It came out dense and dark and small enough to hold in 2 hands. And she set it on the sill to cool the way she had set 100 better loaves before it. And then stood looking at it for a while. The way you look at a thing you already know is the last of something. She was going to eat it, all of it. She was not going to feel bad about that. Then somebody knocked. Orla took the iron from beside the hearth, held it low against her leg, and opened the door the width of her own shoulder. There was a man on her step, tall, leaning on the frame in a way that suggested the frame was doing most of the work. A traveler's cloak, gone black with wet, a hood pulled low. Under it she could see a jaw and a mouth, and nothing else worth the name of a face. "I am not begging," he said. "You are standing on my step, in a blizzard at the 10th bell," Orla said. "That is begging with extra steps." There was a pause. Then, from under the hood, the very smallest sound of a laugh, cut short by something that made him breathe carefully afterward. "Ribs," she thought, "or worse." "I have coin," he said. Coin. Orla let that sit in the cold between them. "You have come to Ash Hollow in the 4th week of a sealed granary, and you are offering me coin. Coin buys a tidy little square of nothing here. You may put it under your tongue and suck on it if you like. The children have been doing that for a month." The stranger did not argue. He simply stood there, swaying very slightly, and did not move to leave, and did not come in, and Orla realized, with a slow and horrible clarity, that he was not standing because he had chosen to. He was standing because he had not yet fallen down. "Oh, for the love of—" She stepped back and hauled the door wide. "Get in." He got in. It took him longer than it should have. He made it to the hearthstone and sat down heavily, and steam lifted off him at once, and in the light of the oven, Orla saw that the black on his cloak was not all snowmelt. She did not ask. In Ash Hollow that winter, you did not ask a bleeding man what he had been bleeding for. She got him water, and her only blanket. She knelt and looked at the wound in his side, which was long and shallow and nasty, and had been opened by something with a proper edge on it, not a farm tool, and she said nothing about that either, and bound it with clean linen she could not spare. And the whole time, on the sill, the loaf sat cooling. He looked at it exactly once, the way a starving man looks at bread when he is trying to be a gentleman about it, and then never again, and the not looking was so loud it filled the room. Orla thought about tomorrow, which contained no bread at all, and about the day after, which was worse. Then she got up, took the loaf off the sill, and tore it in half. "Here." He stared at the half in her hand. "Take it," she said. "It is going cold, and cold bread is an insult to the baker. You have nothing else." "No," Orla agreed. "Then why?" And she should have said something noble. She had been raised on the sort of stories where a woman says something noble at exactly this moment, and it gets carved on a stone somewhere. What she said was, "Because I am not the king." The stranger went very still, meaning that when a man comes to the king's door with a hole in him, the king sends him a tax collector. Orla pushed the bread at him until he took it. "Meaning I have watched grain rot under a crown seal in our own granary for 4 weeks, while a woman 2 doors down buried a child who did not die of the cold. Meaning the man in the palace has never once had to choose between eating his last loaf and giving it away, and if he ever did, I do not believe for one moment that he would give it. She sat down opposite him with her own half and did not eat it. So, I am not the king. That is why. The stranger held the bread in both hands and did not eat either. When he spoke, his voice had changed. It had gone quiet and level, and there was something under it she could not read. You think him a coward? I think him a stranger, Orla said. I think he has never come here. I think if you spoke the name of this valley, at his own table, he would have to ask a clerk where it was. That is not cowardice. That is worse. Cowardice at least requires you to know what you are running from. The oven ticked. Eat your bread, she said more gently. You are about to fall into my fire. And he laughed. Properly, and it broke something in his breathing. And he swore, and he ate. He ate like a man who had not eaten in 3 days and had decided somewhere around the second not to make a fuss about it. When he had finished, he sat looking at his empty hands. You should not have done that, he said. It is bread. It is not a state secret. No. He lifted his head. You do not understand. In this valley, when a wolf comes to a woman's door in the deep of winter, starving, and she feeds him from her own hand, with the last of what she has, and takes nothing for it, you know what that is called. Orla's spoon stopped. She did know. Every child in Ash Hollow knew. It was old, and it was half a joke by now. The sort of thing grandmothers said to make girls blush at the harvest dance. Hearth claim. That is a story, she said. That is a story people tell. It is law, he said. It has simply been a long time since anyone was hungry enough to invoke it. And then he reached up, unhurried, and pushed back the hood. Orla looked at the face beneath it and felt the floor of her life quietly give way. She had seen that face 400 times. It was stamped on the copper penny in her apron pocket, the one she had carried for a month because there was nothing to spend it on. It was on the proclamation, nailed to the granary door, above the seal that had sealed it. It was younger in life than on the coin, and better looking, and considerably more amused, and it was watching her with a pair of gray eyes, gone quite still and very, very serious. Corvin, said the Alpha King of Velmara, in the tone of a man being introduced at a dinner party, you have very strong opinions about me. Orla did not move. She had called the king a coward, in her own kitchen, to his face. She had fed him. She had fed him from her own hand, with the last of what she had, and taken nothing for it, on a night when he came to her door starving. And he was still looking at her, with the crumbs of her bread on his fingers, and he was not smiling any more. Your Majesty, Orla whispered. I did not. No, Corvin agreed. You did not. He rose. He did it slowly and badly, one hand braced against the hearth, and even so the room seemed to arrange itself around him, and somewhere under her ribs something Orla had never felt in her life sat up and paid attention. Nevertheless, said the king, you have. Orla did not sleep. She sat in the chair by the oven, with the iron across her knees, and the Alpha King of Velmara slept on her floor in her only blanket, and she listened to him breathe and constructed, in some detail, the manner of her own execution. They would take her down the valley road to the fortress at Marrow Ford, and there would be a clerk, and the clerk would read the charges, and the charges would say something about the dignity of the crown. And she would have to stand there while a stranger explained to a room full of strangers that she had called the king a coward, and then given him half a loaf of barley bread. She could not decide which half of that was worse. He was gone before dawn. She woke. She had apparently slept, after all, badly folded into a chair like a dropped coat. And the fire was banked, and the blanket was folded, and the man was not there. For one wild singing moment, she allowed herself to believe that none of it had happened. Then she saw what he had left on the table. It was not coin. She would have preferred coin. Coin she could have thrown down a well. It was the copper penny. Her copper penny out of her own apron, the one with his face on it, and he had set it down in the center of her table, squarely, deliberately, face up. Orla put both hands flat on the table and breathed. "He is a king," she said out loud to nobody. "Kings have better things to do." The bell over the valley gate began to ring at the 9th hour of the following morning. Orla was in the square when it started, because everybody in Ash Hollow was in the square. It was distribution day, which meant that once a week Warden Ansel Roke unlocked one door of the sealed granary and let out precisely as much grain as the crown seal permitted him to let out, and the whole valley queued in the snow to watch it not be enough. Ansel had raised her. That was the shape of it. And it was not a complicated shape. He had found her at 11 years old in the burned-out wreck of a mill in the next valley over, and he had put her in a cart, and he had brought her home, and he had taught her to read and to bake and to stand up straight, and if he had also taught her never to expect very much from anyone. He had not been wrong, had he? He was up on the granary steps in his heavy gray coat, and he was speaking, and he had a good voice for it. Ansel Roke always had a good voice for it. "And I have written again to the palace," he was saying, "as I wrote in the 8th month, and the 9th, and the 10th, and I will write again. And I will keep writing until a man down there in that warm hall remembers that there are wolves up here, in the cold, who are eating their own boots." The crowd made the low, tired, grateful noise of people who have heard this before, and needed to hear it again. "He does not know we exist," Ansel said. "That is the truth of it. Say it plain. The boy has never set foot in this valley." And Orla, who had woken that morning with a copper penny burning a hole in her table, felt something go cold and strange in her stomach, because she had said that, almost word for word, 2 nights ago, to a bleeding man on her hearthstone. She had said it as though it were her own. That was when the bell began to ring. It was not the alarm bell. Orla knew the alarm. This was the gate bell, the old brass one that had not been rung in her lifetime, the one that was rung for an arrival. And the crowd turned as one animal and looked up the valley road. Ansel Roke came down 2 steps. And Orla, watching his face, saw a thing she had never seen there before in 18 years. He did not know what was happening. "Who cleared this?" he said. Nobody answered him. Because, up the valley road, through the snow, in a long, unhurried line, came riders under a banner. And the banner was not a house banner, and it was not a levee banner. It was black, and on it there was a wolf, and above the wolf there was a crown. Someone in the crowd began, very quietly, to pray. Orla stood absolutely still in the middle of the square, with the snow going down her collar, and she thought, "He sent them. He sent them to arrest me, and he has come to watch." And then the riders came close enough for her to count, and she saw that there were only 9 of them, and that they carried no cages and no irons and no clerk, and that the man riding at the head of them, bareheaded in the snow with his cloak thrown back off one shoulder as though the cold were a personal friend of his, was smiling directly at her. He came off his horse in the square like a man arriving at a party to which he was very slightly late and not remotely sorry. The whole valley went down, not gracefully. It went down the way a crowd goes down when nobody has ever done it before, and everybody is copying the person in front of them, in a slow, staggered, rustling collapse. And Orla went down with it, and stared very hard at the trodden snow, and prayed to anything that might be listening that he would walk past her. A pair of boots stopped in front of her. "Get up," said the Alpha King of Velmara. "You are the only person in this valley who has ever spoken to me like a human being, and I refuse to have you kneeling in the slush." Orla got up. He looked, she noted, with resentment, entirely well. 2 nights ago, he had needed her doorframe to hold him upright. Now, he stood in her square with snow melting in his dark hair, and the wound not showing on him anywhere, watching her with frank and undisguised delight. Standing this close to him in daylight, Orla understood a thing she had entirely failed to understand in her kitchen. He was an alpha, not in the way the word got used at the harvest dance. In the old way. The air around him had weight, and every wolf in that square could feel it, and her own wolf, which had spent 18 years being quiet and sensible and thoroughly unremarkable, rolled over on its back in the snow. "Traitor," she thought at it. "Your Majesty." Ansel Roke had come down off the granary steps. His voice was steady and warm and pitched to carry. "Ash Hollow is honored. We have written to you many times." "I know," said Corvin. "I have read them." Something crossed Ansel's face too fast to name. "Then you will know," he said, "how our position stands." "I do." The king's eyes had not left Orla. "But I have not come about the grain, not this morning. This morning I have come about my wife." The square made no sound at all. Orla heard the word arrive. She heard it land in 300 pairs of ears. She felt every head in Ash Hollow turn. "I beg your pardon," she said. "You will not need to beg for it. It is granted freely, and forever, on account of the bread." Corvin turned to the crowd, spread his hands, and raised his voice to the pleasant carrying pitch of a man announcing a bridge or a treaty. "2 nights ago I came into this valley alone, out of favor with a knife, and I knocked upon the door of your baker, and she took me in and bound my side and fed me the last of her own bread from her own hand, under hearth claim, which, as I am given to understand, is still very much the law up here." "Your Majesty," Ansel said, "hearth claim is a folk custom." "It is in the 2nd book of the Valley Code," said Corvin without turning round, "at the 11th article, and it has never been struck out. And I looked, because I sat up all of last night with a very tired clerk, looking." He smiled at Orla. "It is astonishing what one will do." "I did not know who you were," Orla said. "No, I did not intend to claim anything." "No," Corvin agreed. "That is rather the point. A claim, made knowing, is a bargain. A claim made not knowing is less." And here his voice changed very slightly, and only she was close enough to hear it change. "A great deal more interesting, Your Majesty." Ansel Roke stepped down into the snow, and his hands were open, and his tone was the reasonable, fatherly, iron under velvet tone that Orla had known since she was 11 years old. "The girl is mine. I raised her. She is a baker. She is honest, and she is plainly frightened out of her wits. If some offense has been given, let the fault be mine, and let it be settled quietly. There is no need to drag the crown into a valley joke." Corvin turned. And Orla, who had spent 18 years watching Ansel Roke look at other men, watched Ansel Roke get looked at. "A joke?" said the king. "A custom, Your Majesty? A pretty old story." Corvin said it gently, and the gentleness was somehow much worse. "If hearth claim is only a pretty old story, then a great many things in that 2nd book are only pretty old stories. The grain reserve, the winter levy, the right of a valley warden to hold a crown seal on a granary door for 4 weeks, with no crown officer present to witness it." He tilted his head. "Shall we go on? I find I have developed an appetite for the 2nd book." Ansel Roke said nothing at all. "No," said Corvin, "I did not think so." He turned back to Orla, and just like that the whole terrible weight of him folded away again, and he was nothing but a rumpled young man grinning at a baker in a snowy square. "Wife, you look appalled." "I am appalled." "Good. Marriages have been built on less." He offered her his arm. "Come to the fortress. Come and shout at me over dinner about the grain, which you will do superbly, and which nobody in my entire kingdom has done for 4 years. Bring your appalling opinions. Bring the copper penny. I know you still have it." "Why?" Orla said. The whole square was listening. She did not care. "You could have hanged me. You could have ridden through and never come back, and I would have kept my mouth shut about it for the rest of my life. You are the Alpha King of Velmara, and I am a baker, with no bread. So why?" And Corvin looked at her for a long moment, and the delight went out of his face, and what was left behind it was quiet and steady and entirely serious. "Because when a man is starving," he said, "and a stranger feeds him, he learns exactly what that stranger is. And I have been starving in one way or another since I was 19 years old, and in all that time, in the whole of my kingdom, Nobody has ever handed me anything at all. He held out his arm again. Come and be appalled at me, Orla. I am asking properly. And Orla, heaven help her, took it. She did not see Ansel Roke's face as she went. She was to think about that a great deal, afterward, that of all the moments in the whole business, that was the one she would have given anything to have back. The moment she turned her back on the man who raised her and walked away up the valley road on the arm of a king, and did not look round, because if she had looked round, she would have seen him watching her go. And she would have seen that he was not surprised. Marrow Ford was a fortress, not a palace, and Orla was glad of it. A palace she would have hated on principle. A fortress was only a large, cold building full of drafts and men, and she had been in barns with better manners. They had put her in a room with a bed in it, an entire bed for one person. She had stood in the doorway looking at it for some time, the way you look at something that has been left out for you by mistake. At the 7th bell, a girl came to say that His Majesty would receive her at supper in the great hall. No, said Orla. The girl blinked. No, no. Tell him I will not eat in a hall. She expected an argument. What she got, 40 minutes later, was the Alpha King of Velmara letting himself into the fortress kitchen, with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, carrying a cold pie under one arm like a man smuggling a dog into a temple. The hall, he said, is full of men who want things from me. The kitchen is full of nobody. You have excellent instincts. He put the pie down on the block and looked at it with enormous satisfaction. I have stolen this. It is your pie. It was in a locked pantry. Orla and I did not have the key. Do not take this from me. She did not laugh. She very nearly did, and hated herself for it. He cut the pie badly, which she noticed, and gave her the larger half, which she also noticed, and she sat with it in front of her on the block and did not touch it. Eat, no. It is not poisoned, probably. He paused. That was a joke, and I withdraw it. Eat. There are 411 people in Ash Hollow, Orla said, and under 6 days of food between them, and a granary in the middle of that valley, with your seal on the door, and enough wheat behind it to carry them to the thaw twice over. So no, your majesty, I will not be eating your pie. The kitchen was very quiet. Corvin set down his knife. When he spoke again, the ease had gone out of him entirely, and what was underneath was a good deal harder and considerably younger. That seal, he said, was placed on the 11th of the 10th month, on the authority of a crown officer named Halvik, who has been dead since the 9th. I did not know that until 11 days ago. I have been trying since to find out who signed his name, and I have got as far as this valley, and no further. And it is why I came up the road alone and in a bad cloak, instead of down it with 900 men. Because, whoever it is, knew I was coming the last 2 times, and I would rather like to survive meeting him. Orla stared at him. Break the seal, she said. Orla, break it tonight. You are the king. It is your seal. Ride down the valley with me now and put your own hand on that door and open it, and I will eat every pie in this fortress. I will eat the plates. Corvin looked at her for a long moment across the block, and she watched him decide something. Fetch your cloak, he said. They broke the seal at the 4th bell of the morning, in the dark, in the snow, in front of an entire valley that had been dragged out of bed by a boy running door to door, shouting that the king was in the square with a hammer. Orla stood on the granary steps and watched Corvin of Velmara take the crown seal off that door with his own hands, and she heard the sound Ash Hollow made when the doors came open, and she found she could not see very well, and she blamed the cold. Warden Ansel Roke stood at the foot of the steps in his heavy grey coat and did not move at all. Afterward, in the grey of first light, Corvin sat down on the granary steps beside her, like a man who had been on his feet for 20 hours, which he had. Now, he said, you will eat. He held out a piece of bread. Valley bread from the first sacks, still warm, because somebody's mother had already lit an oven. Orla looked at it and found she could not take it. It sat there in his hand between them for what felt like a very long time. "I do not understand you," Corvin said at last. And he said it quietly, without any of the performance in it. "You gave a starving stranger the last thing you owned. Now a man offers you bread, and you look at it like it will bite. Because I know what it is for. It is for eating. It is for keeping me." Orla heard her own voice go flat and horrible, and could not stop it. "Nobody gives you anything for nothing, Your Majesty. Ansel Roque pulled me out of a burned mill when I was 11 years old, and he fed me, and he taught me, and he kept me, and he kept me, because I am useful. Because I could carry, and count, and bake, and stand up straight, and hold my tongue. That is what I am. I am a pair of hands with a person attached, and I have made my peace with it, and I have been perfectly content. And then you turn up on my doorstep, and put a crown on it, and call it a marriage." She was shaking. "You want something from me. Everybody wants something from me. I have simply never once in my whole life been given a thing without a bill arriving afterward. So no, I will not take your bread, because I cannot afford it." The wind came up the valley and went through the both of them. Corvin did not argue. He did not soothe her. He turned the bread over in his hands and looked out at the square, and when he spoke, his voice was very level. "When my father died," he said, "I was 19. Within a month, every man in that fortress had explained to me, kindly, what I was for. I was for signing. I was for standing at windows and being seen. I was for marrying whoever they picked." He turned his head. "So I know precisely what you mean. And I want you to understand that I am not offering you bread because you are useful to me." "Then why?" "Because you are cold," said the Alpha King of Velmara. "And you are hungry, and there is bread, and I would like you to have some. That is the entire scheme. I am sorry it is not more impressive." Orla did not take the bread, but she sat there beside him on the granary steps until the sun came up, and she did not leave, and something in her chest had begun very quietly to come apart, which is exactly when the arrow hit the door. It went into the granary door, a hand's width above Corvin's head, with a sound like an axe going into a stump, and Orla was moving before she had decided to move. She hit him in the chest with her shoulder, and took him sideways off the steps into the snow. And the second bolt went through the air where his throat had been, and somewhere behind them the square began to scream. "Down," she said. "Stay down. I am down. Stay down." She got him behind the corner of the granary wall, into the black slot, between the wall and the woodpile, where she had hidden as a child, and she crouched there, with her back against the stone, and her heart going like a hammer, and looked at the man beside her. He was not afraid. That was the thing that stopped her breath. Corvin of Velmara was crouched in the snow with 2 crossbow bolts in the door behind him and his hair full of ice, and he was scanning the rooftops with a calm, sorting, unhurried attention, and he was not afraid. "How many times?" Orla said. "This makes 4. 4. 2 on the road, 1 in my own bedchamber, which was rude." He was still watching the rooftops. "Orla, when I say run, run into the crowd, not away from it. A bolt will not chase you into a crowd. I am not leaving you. That is a lovely sentiment, and I am going to remember it fondly. Run." She did not run. They came out of the alley by the tanners, 3 of them, hooded, and they came fast, and they came straight for the king. And Orla understood in one cold second that whatever was about to happen to her, she was not going to be able to fight it. She was a baker. She had strong arms and a bad temper and no sword, but she knew this building. She got her hand around the iron peel that leaned against the granary wall, the long paddle she had used 10,000 times to pull loaves out of a burning oven, and she did not swing it at anyone. She jammed it into the chute latch. The grain chute went off, like a broken dam. 2 tons of crown wheat came out of that wall in a roaring golden wave, and took the first 2 men off their feet and buried them to the chest, and the third turned to look at it, because everybody looks, and Corvin took him. Orla did not see all of it, she saw the beginning of it, and she saw the shape of what the Alpha King of Vilmara was, under the charm and the bad cloaks and the stolen pie, and she looked away, and she was not ashamed of looking away. When it was over, there was wheat in the snow up to her knees, and a great deal of it was going pink, and Corvin was standing in the middle of it breathing hard, with his hand pressed to his side, where a wound 3 days old had opened again. "Well," he said, "that is the granary open. You are bleeding, so are you." Orla looked down. There was a long, clean line up her forearm, where something had gone through her sleeve, and she had not felt it at all, and now that she was looking at it, she felt it enormously. She sat down in the wheat. Corvin crossed to her at once and knelt, and took her arm in both hands with an urgency that had not been there when the bolts were flying, and that was when Orla, light-headed, bleeding, sitting in 2 tons of somebody else's wheat, finally asked the question, "Forster? Who wants you dead?" He did not answer. "You knew," she said. "You have known since the road 4 times. You said you did not come to Ash Hollow because of hearth claim. You did not come for me. You came because whoever is doing this is here." Corvin's hands went still on her arm. "Let me see to this," he said gently. "Answer me. Your arm first." And that, Orla thought, was an answer. She let him bind it. She sat very quietly and let him, and she watched his face while he worked, and she thought, "He is not lying to me. He is simply not telling me, which is a different animal, and I do not know yet which one bites." Behind them, guards were dragging the 2 buried men out of the wheat. Orla turned her head to watch, and the light caught the fallen man's coat, where the snow had been brushed off it heavy, gray. Valley wool, carded and dyed, the way it was carded and dyed exactly one place in the whole of Vilmara. It was an Ash Hollow coat. For the better part of a month, Orla applied herself to the problem of the king. It was, she told herself, the only reasonable response to a man who had been shot at 4 times and would not say why. Somebody wanted Corvin of Vilmara dead. Somebody had put an Ash Hollow coat on the man who tried it. And Orla, who had spent her life in a valley where you learned everything by watching and nothing by asking, did what she was good at. She watched. She was very well placed to do it because he would not let her leave. She was, he pointed out, the only witness to 2 of the 4 attempts, and she had a hole in her arm to prove it. And until he knew who had opened the granary chute of this particular conspiracy, she was staying inside the walls of Marrow Ford, where he could see her. "I have an oven," Orla said. "You have a kingdom," said Corvin, "and I have a room full of grain ledgers that nobody has been able to read for 6 years, and I am told you can count." Which is how the last baker of Ash Hollow came to spend her winter in a cold stone room in a fortress, going through the tally books of every granary in Vilmara with a candle and a bad attitude. The king kept turning up in it. He turned up with lamp oil. He turned up with a second chair, which he carried himself, up 4 flights, and would not explain. He turned up at the 11th bell with a plate of cheese and put it down at her elbow, and did not say a single word about it, and left, and she ate all of it, and was furious about that for 2 days. He turned up one afternoon with flour on his hands. "No," said Orla. "You have not heard the proposal. You have been in my kitchen. I have been in a kitchen. The kitchen has no owner. It is a public building." He held up his hands, which were indeed catastrophic. "I have made a loaf. You have made a brick. I have made a loaf, and I would like your professional opinion, and I would like you to be honest, because I am the king, and nobody has been honest with me about anything since I was 19 years old." It was, in fact, a brick. It was gray, and it was dense, and it had a crust on it like a roof tile, and when she rapped it with her knuckle, it went tonk. Orla put her hand over her mouth. "Do not," said Corvin. She laughed. She could not help it. She laughed until she had to sit down, and he stood there in her ledger room, covered in flour with his catastrophic loaf, watching her do it with an expression of such complete and undefended delight that she stopped laughing rather suddenly. He asked her to teach him. She said no. She taught him anyway, at the 11th bell, 3 nights running in the kitchen with nobody in it, and he was terrible, and he was patient, and he listened to her the way nobody in her life had ever listened to her, as though what she said next was going to be the important part. On the 4th night, he stood too close to her at the block, reaching past her for the salt, and his arm brushed hers, and Orla's whole body went to war. She stepped back so fast, she cracked her hip on the table. "Your Majesty, Corvin." "Your Majesty," Orla said. "I do not feel it." He went still. "You said hearth claim. You said your wolf knew me. You have told half of Velmara that I am your wife, and I have waited a month for the thing that is supposed to happen, and I feel nothing. No bond, no thread, nothing. Which means either you are lying to me, or you are wrong, and I would very much like to know which, because I am running out of ways to explain to myself why I keep coming down here at the 11th bell." The silence went on a long time. "You feel nothing," Corvin said. "Nothing, right." He set the salt down carefully. "Then I am wrong. Obviously I am wrong, and you are a very rational woman, and you should go to bed." He said it lightly, and he smiled while he said it, and Orla, who had been studying that smile for a month, saw for the very first time exactly what it was. It was a door closing. She lay awake that night with her arm aching and her chest aching worse, and she thought about the way he had said, obviously, and she thought, "I have hurt him." And then, with a sort of horror, "I did not want to hurt him." And then, lying in the dark in a bed that was too big for one person, in a fortress she had no business being in, Orla Vaney admitted the thing she had been refusing to admit for 3 weeks, which was that she no longer wanted the Alpha King of Velmara to go away. She went back to the ledgers at dawn, because she could not sleep. And because she could not sleep, she was clumsy, and because she was clumsy, she knocked the 8th book of the Northern Tallies off the table, and it fell open at a page she had already checked twice. 3 grain shipments. Signed out of the Crown Reserve, bound for Ash Hollow. The 8th month, the 9th month, the 10th month, they had been sent. Orla knelt on the cold floor, with the book in her hands and the whole of that starving winter going through her head like a knife. And she thought quite calmly, then where did they go? She never got to finish the thought, because down in the courtyard, 4 stories below her window, the gate horns began to sound, and Orla went to the arrow slit and looked out and saw a column of riders coming in under a banner she did not know, black and silver, a tower and a chain, and beside her, in the corridor, a maid stopped dead with an armful of linen and said, to nobody in particular, in a voice of absolute delight, "They have come early. The Lady Sennin has come to marry the king." Orla had served bread at 100 feasts. She had never once sat down at one. The hall at Marrow Ford had been scrubbed and hung and lit until it did not look like a fortress at all, and the Ironhold delegation came into it under black and silver, and Orla stood at the side of the room in a borrowed gown, the color of wet slate, and understood, with total clarity, that she looked exactly like what she was. A tall woman, with a baker's forearms, and a scar up one of them, dressed as somebody else. Lady Sennin Brack of Ironhold was small and dark, and perhaps 22, and she crossed the entire hall to speak to Orla directly, which nobody else in the room had the courage to do. "You are the baker." "I am." "They tell me you buried 3 men under 2 tons of wheat." "2 men," said Orla. "The 3rd was the king." Lady Sennin looked at her for a moment with an expression Orla could not place at all, and then she smiled, and the smile was rueful and clever and entirely without malice, and Orla thought, with something close to despair, "Oh no. She is kind." "My father has wanted this alliance for 6 years, Sennin said. "I have wanted it for none of them. I am told the king has been refusing it for 4. She lifted her cup. Whatever you have done to him, madam, please continue. And then she was gone into the crowd, and Orla stood there, holding a cup she had not asked for and could not drink. She found Corvin an hour later out on the north rampart, alone, with his back to the hall and the music leaking out through the door behind him, and the whole black valley dropping away below. "You would rather be anywhere else," she said. He did not turn round. "I would rather be in a ditch." "Then why are you smiling in there?" A pause. Then a short breath of laughter, surprised out of him, and not a happy one. He turned, and the charm was gone. The whole apparatus of it, the ease and the wickedness and the stolen pies, folded away like a table being cleared, and what was left, leaning against the parapet in the cold, was a tired man of 26, with grey eyes and nothing at all behind them to hide with. "They have been trying to marry me off since I was 19, he said. "Ironhold Kadur, the river houses. Every man on that council has a daughter or a niece or an interest in it. And every year I smile at them and say not yet, and every year the smile costs more." He looked out at the Black Valley. "Shall I give you the ugly part? I am very good at being liked. It is the only thing I have ever been good at. And being liked is the whole of the distance between me and a council that would run Velmara perfectly well without me, and be glad of the chance. So I am charming at them, 7 years of it, and I have got so good at it that I can no longer find the seam." "The seam, the place where the charm stops," said Corvin. "And I start." He smiled. It was thin, and it was defensive, and it was the same smile he had given her in the kitchen when she told him she felt nothing. Orla stepped forward and put her hand against the side of his face. He stopped breathing. "Not with me," she said quietly. "Put it away. I have been watching you for a month, and I have seen the man who carried a chair up 4 flights and would not say why, and cannot bake a loaf to save his life and steals pies out of his own pantry, because the hall frightens him." Her thumb moved once. "I have no opinion of the king. I have never met him, but that man," she held his eyes, "that man I would keep." Something gave way behind his eyes. "Orla," he said, and his voice was in pieces. And then he reached into his coat and brought out, with the gravity of a man producing a state document, a small sticky honey bun, squashed flat, stolen from the feast table. "I have nothing to give you," he said. "I never have anything to give you. You will not take it anyway." Orla looked at the bun. She thought about 100 meals she had made for other people. She thought about 18 years of a valley that ate what she baked and never once asked whether she had eaten. She thought about a man on a granary step in the gray dawn, holding out a piece of warm bread, and her own hands refusing to move. She took it. She took it out of his hand, and she ate it. And it was the first thing in her entire life that Orla Vane had ever accepted from anybody, and the world came apart. It hit her in the chest, like a door blown in. Heat and light, and a great roaring rush of something pouring through her from the place where their fingers had touched. And it was not hers. None of it was hers. It was him, his terror, his hope. 6 years of a man standing in rooms full of people and being entirely alone in every one of them. Orla staggered back against the parapet with her hand over her mouth. Corvin's eyes were black. He had not moved. "You felt that," he said. She could feel him. She could feel him the way she felt her own heartbeat, and he was blazing, and he was terrified, and he was reaching for her without moving a single muscle, which is exactly why she said it. "It was a bun," said Orla. "It was sugar and a cold night. It was nothing." The bond went dark. She watched it happen. She watched every scrap of light go out of Corvin of Velmara's face, and she watched him gather it all back up and put the smile on over the top of it, and it was the most graceful and terrible thing she had ever seen a man do. "Of course," he said. "Nothing. You are quite right. Corvin, you should go in. You will freeze." And down at the far end of the rampart, the door opened, and a servant came out into the cold, with a covered tray in both hands and said, "Your Majesty." the Alliance loaf. It was a beautiful thing. Orla, even then, could not help but see that it was a beautiful thing. The Alliance loaf was an iron-hold custom, and it was a good one. The two houses to a treaty broke one loaf between them and ate it in front of witnesses, because you do not put a blade in a man you have taken bread from. Half the hall had come out onto the rampart, behind the servant, Lord Aldous Brock, Senan, the council, Ansel Roke, who had come up from Ash Hollow for the feast in his good grey coat, standing at the back with his hands folded. It was plated and glazed, and it had been baked with cardamom and honey, and it steamed in the freezing air. Corvin reached for it, and Orla's whole body said, no. She did not think. She did not reason. She had been standing over ovens since she was 11 years old, and there is a thing that happens in a baker's nose that happens nowhere else in the world, and what she smelled under the cardamom and the honey was bitter and green and wrong. Her hand shot out and knocked the loaf off the tray. It hit the stone and broke apart, and the hull made a sound like a wave going out. Madam, Lord Aldous was on his feet. That is an insult to my house. Nobody touch it. Orla was already on her knees in the snow, with the pieces in her hands, tearing the crumb open, and she got her face down into it and breathed, and then she sat back and looked up at 400 people and said, very clearly, hemlock seed. Ground into the flour, not on the crust, in the crumb, which means it was in the dough, which means it was not the kitchen, and it was not tonight. She looked at Corvin. It was baked with it. Somebody made this loaf to kill you 2 days ago. The silence was absolute. And then Corvin of Velmara knelt down beside her in the snow and the broken bread, and he did not look at the loaf, and he did not look at the hall. He looked at her, and he said very quietly, so that only she could hear it, say nothing else, not one word more, not to anyone in this hall, and I am including yourself. And I am including yourself, Corvin. Trust me for 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, Orla. That is all I am asking. And then he stood, and he laughed, and he made a joke about iron-hold baking that got the whole rampart laughing with him, and he took Lord Aldous by the shoulder and steered him back inside, and he was charming, and he was easy, and he was lying to every single person in that hall. Orla stayed on her knees in the snow. She watched him go through the door. She watched the smile drop off his face the instant he was through it. And she watched him turn, not toward his guards, not toward the council chamber, but down the black stair, toward the west tower where the valley men were quartered. She waited a count of 20. Then she followed him. The door was open 2 fingers, and there was a light inside, and Orla stood in the corridor for the length of 3 breaths and did not want to look. She looked. Corvin was standing at Ansel Roke's writing table, with a lamp in one hand and Ansel Roke's papers spread out under it, and he was going through them with the swift, practiced, guilty economy of a man who has done this before. "What are you doing?" Orla said. He did not startle. That was the worst part. He simply raised his head and looked at her, and she watched him understand exactly how much this was going to cost him. "Orla," he said, "sit down." "What are you doing in my warden's room?" "Sit down. Please, answer me." He set the lamp on the table. "I have been hunting Ansel Roke," said the Alpha King of Velmara, "for 4 months. The words came into the room and Orla could not make them mean anything. They were sounds. They were a language she did not have. "The grain went out," Corvin said. 3 times. 8th month, 9th month, 10th. Full reserve shipments. Signed, sealed, sent up that road. It never reached Ash Hollow, and it never went back, and it did not evaporate, and I have spent 4 months and 2 dead clerks trying to find out where 1,000 sacks of crown wheat went. He set his palm flat on the papers. "It went over the pass. It was sold. To Ironhold, to the river houses, to anyone with silver, at famine prices, by a man with a crown seal he took off. A corpse. And then that man sealed his own granary, and stood on the steps of it every week and told his valley that the king had forgotten them." "No," Orla said. "Orla, No, he raised me. Her voice had gone somewhere very far away. He pulled me out of a burned mill. He fed me. He fed you, Corvin agreed. On grain he stole from you. She put her hand out and found the doorframe. There is more, he said. And I am going to say it, because if I do not say it now, I will never say it. Do you remember what you told me on your hearthstone? That the king had never come to the valley, that he did not know the name of it, that he would have to ask a clerk where it was. He was watching her, and his face was terrible. I have read every letter that came out of Ash Hollow in 6 years. Every one. Those are Ansel Roke's words, Orla, word for word in his hand. You have been speaking with that man's voice since you were 11 years old, and nobody ever thought to tell you it was not your own. The corridor tilted, because she could hear it. She could hear him on the granary steps in the snow. The boy has never set foot in this valley. And she could hear her own voice saying it 2 nights earlier to a bleeding stranger on her floor, as though she had thought of it herself. That is how I knew, Corvin said quietly, that you were not part of it, because you said it to my face, in your own kitchen, with nothing to gain. Nobody in on a thing tells the truth about it that badly. And there it was. Orla stood very still and felt the whole shape of the last 2 months turn over in the dark and show her its underside. You needed somebody close to him, she said. Orla, somebody he trusted. Somebody who could go anywhere in that valley and open any door and never be questioned, because everybody in Ash Hollow knows Ansel Rogue's girl. Her voice was not shaking. She noticed that with a kind of distant clinical interest. Somebody whose word the whole valley would believe against his. You did not come to my door by accident. I came to your door, bleeding, in a blizzard at random, and it is the only piece of luck I have had in 4 years. And when you found out who I was, you put a crown on it. She laughed. It came out wrong, hearthclaim. You sat up all night with a clerk. You told me that yourself, and I thought it was charming. It was not a lie. It was not the truth. No, said Corvin, it was not the truth. He came around the table. He came slowly, and he stopped the moment she moved, and he stood there with his hands open and empty. And Orla looked at the man she had been feeding at the 11th bell for a month, and could not find him anywhere in the room. You knew, she said, the whole time, every night in that kitchen, when you carried the chair up, when you were laughing at me about the loaf. You knew that the man who raised me had starved 400 people, and you looked at me and said nothing, because I did not think you would believe me. His voice cracked straight down the middle. I thought you would go to him. I thought you would go straight to him and tell him, and he would kill you for it, and I could not. You were right. Orla was crying, and she had not given herself permission, and she despised it. I would have gone to him. That is the joke of it, and you knew that. And you knew it because you had studied me. The way you study a ledger, Orla. No, I told you. She backed into the door. I told you on the granary steps. Nobody gives me anything for nothing. I told you exactly what I was afraid of, and you sat there with your bread in your hand and you let me say it. And then you let me believe I was wrong. You are wrong. Am I? She stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and she looked at him. And she asked the only question there was, what do you need from me, Corvin? And he did not hesitate. That was the thing. He had been rebuilding the world one careful stone at a time, and he did not hesitate, because he was, at the bottom of everything, a king. I need your testimony, he said. The silence went on a long time. Yes, said Orla. Of course you do. She opened the door. Orla, wait. There is a poisoner under this roof, an Ironholt in my hall, and I— He stopped. She watched him stop, watched him go looking for a better word and fail to reach it in time. I need you here, please. Need, out of every word in the language. That was the one he had gone to first, and he had gone to it without thinking, and Orla thought, yes, that is what I am. That is what I have always been. Sleep well, Your Majesty, she said, and went out into the dark. She got as far as the west stair, before her legs stopped working, and she sat down on the cold step in a borrowed gown and put her head in her hands. Every night in that kitchen, every single one. Orla. She knew the voice before she looked up. She had known that voice since she was 11 years old. Ansel Roque was standing at the bottom of the stair, in his good gray coat, and his face, when she raised her head, went soft with a grief, so immediate and so complete, that she was on her feet and moving toward him before she had thought about it at all. "Child, what has he done? And because it hurt too much to hold," she told him. "Not the investigation, not the grain. She had enough left somewhere under the wreckage to keep that back. But the rest of it came out of her in pieces on the stair, that it had never been real, that she had been used, that the man had needed a door into the valley, and she had been the door." Ansel's hands came down on her shoulders, warm and heavy, exactly as they had come down on her shoulders at 11 years old in the back of a cart. "I have known since he stood in our square," Ansel said. "I would have spared you it, if there had been any way. The whole valley had seen it coming then. She had been the last one in it to know." "Come home," Ansel said. "Come back to the valley. Come back to your oven." He pressed his thumbs into her shoulders. "But Orla, before you go, there is a thing you must know, and it is worse than you think, and I would give my right hand not to be the man to tell you." Orla lifted her head. "He put the hemlock in that loaf himself." The stair went very quiet. "I saw him," Ansel said, "not an hour ago in the west kitchen, with the Alliance bread and a paper twist in his hand, and he never saw me. He has been refusing Ironhold for 4 years, and now Lord Aldous is under his roof and cannot be refused. So he poisons the loaf, and blames Ironhold's own kitchen, and breaks the Alliance and the house together." His hand tightened. "And he let you knock it out of his hand in front of 400 witnesses, so that it would be your voice that said it, so that when Ironhold burns, the world will remember it was the king's own baker who found the poison." And Orla stood very still on the stair, and listened to the whole thing, and felt something in her go cold and clear and quiet, like water freezing, because an hour ago, Corvin of Velmara had been on the north rampart. With her. She had had her hand on his face. She had eaten a squashed honey bun out of his coat pocket, and the world had come apart, and he had stood there with his heart flayed open in front of her while she called it nothing, and she had watched him do it, and there had not been one single moment in that hour when Ansel Roque could have seen him anywhere near a kitchen. And there was worse. The hemlock had been in the crumb, in the dough, baked in, 2 days ago. Before Ironhold ever came through the gates, Ansel Roque had just told her a lie. He had told it beautifully, with his hands warm on her shoulders, and he had cut it to fit the exact shape of her broken heart, which meant he had been watching her, which meant he had always been watching her. "You saw him an hour ago," Orla said. "I did. In the west kitchen." "Yes, child, you are lying to me," said Orla. "And you have been lying to me since I was 11 years old." His face did not change. It simply stopped. The grief and the warmth held there like a mask on a man who had forgotten to keep his hand up, and in that half a second Orla saw what was behind it, and there was nothing behind it at all. She was already running. She came into the great hall through the servants' door, with snow to the knee, and 400 people turned to look at her. Lord Aldous Brack was on his feet with his sword hand on the table. Corvin stood at the head of the room being accused of murder, and he saw her come in, and Orla watched him brace himself, because he thought she had come to bury him. Believe me, she thought at him, and had no way at all to send it. "I am sorry. It took me so long to get here." Then she turned to the hall. "An hour ago," she said, "the king was on the north rampart with me. He never went near a kitchen, and I will swear it on any book you put in front of me." Her voice carried the way a baker's voice carries across a yard, at dawn. And the hemlock was not sprinkled on that loaf. It was ground into the flour. It was baked in, 2 days ago, before Ironhold ever came up the road. I am the last baker in Ash Hollow, and I would stake my hands on it. Aldous Brack turned. "Then who? Have Warden Roque's rooms searched?" Orla's chin came up. Do it now, while he is stood in front of you, and cannot get to them. His saddlebags, his coat, his writing table, if you turn out nothing but a warden's papers, then hang me in the yard, and I will not complain. But if you turn out iron holed silver, and a crown seal belonging to a clerk named Halvik, who has been in the ground since the 9th month, the girl is out of her wits with grief, said Ansel Roke. Then the search will cost you nothing, said Lord Aldisbrack. And Ansel Roke, who had never in 18 years raised his voice, looked at Orla across that hall with an expression of such pure and undisguised hatred that she finally saw the whole of him. He ran, not for the door, for her. She saw the knife come out of his sleeve, and she saw where it was going, and it was not going into her, it was going past her into the king, and Orla Vane did the only thing she had ever been any good at. She got in the way. The blade went into her forearm, into the same arm, along the same white line she had taken at the granary, and it hurt, and she did not care, and she got both hands into that good grey coat, and put Ansel Roke through a trestle table with every ounce of 18 years of hauling flour sacks behind it, and she knelt on his chest, bleeding on him. Until the guards came. They found the silver, they found Halvik's seal, they found, folded into the lining of his saddlebag, a paper twist of hemlock seed. Afterward, in the emptying hall, with her arm bound and the noise of it all draining away, Corvin came to her. He did not touch her. He stopped an arm's length away, and stood there, and he looked like a man who had been hollowed out with a spoon. You believed me, he said. No, said Orla. I believed the loaf. There is a difference, and you will have to live with it. Orla, I am going home. She picked up her cloak. The valley is fed and the granary is open. And that was your doing, and it was well done. And I think you are the loneliest man I have ever stood next to. Her voice did not break. She was proud of that for years afterward. But you sat across a kitchen table from me for a month. You knew what he had done to me. And you let me go on being useful to you. So, no, I will not stay. I will do anything, I know, said Orla. And she walked out of Marrowford into the snow, and went home to her oven, and did not look back. She had been warden of Ash Hollow for 6 months, and she was good at it, and she had never once wanted it. The granary stood open. The valley was fed. There was a school in the mill house now, and a crown officer who came up the road every fortnight and was properly terrified of her, and 411 people who had stopped calling her the baker and started calling her warden, which she hated and did not correct. The king of Elmara had done all of that, and the valley had begun, cautiously, to love him for it. Orla went on baking, anyway. Every morning, before the ledgers and the petitions, she lit her own oven in her own house and made bread for people who no longer needed it, and if anyone had asked her why, she could not have told them. He wrote to her, not flowers. She had wondered, in some ugly corner of herself, whether it would be flowers, and it was not, and she despised how relieved she was. The first thing that came up the valley road was a book. It was the second book of the Valley Code, and it was bound in crown leather, and it had been opened to the 11th article, and the 11th article had been struck through in ink, and signed and sealed. Hearthclaim repealed. In all of Velmara, forever. There was a note with it, in his own hand, and it said, You never chose it. I have taken it off you. You are not my wife, and you never were, and no man will ever be able to do to any woman what I did to you. I am sorry. It is the only thing I own that was worth giving you. Orla sat down on her kitchen floor with the book in her lap and cried for an hour. Then the letters began. 2 and 3, a week in his own hand. And he never once asked her for anything. Some were about the valley. Some were about the ledgers, as though her honest answer were still worth having. Some were only about him, the council, and Ironhold, and Lady Sennin, who had gone home, unmarried and delighted, and had apparently written to him twice, to tell him he was an idiot. One said, I have made another loaf. I am beginning to suspect the fault is not in the flour. One said, I keep trying to write down what I did, and it keeps coming out as an explanation, so I will not explain it. I lied to you by not speaking, every night, in a kitchen, while you taught me to bake. That is what I did. There is no version of it that is smaller. And one at the bottom of a long page, she had promised herself she would not finish. You said, nobody gives you anything without a bill arriving afterward. I have thought about that sentence every day for 4 months. I did not want you because you were useful. I wanted you because you handed me the last thing you had and did not want to be thanked for it. And I have never in my life met anyone who did not want to be thanked. She did not answer a single one. She kept them all. Merritt and Tova had opinions, because they always did. Merritt was the boy who ran the granary chute now, and Tova had been the king's own guard captain until she had asked, very formally, to be posted to Ash Hollow, and Orla had never asked her why, and Tova had never volunteered it. He wrote to the crown officer, Tova said, one evening, apropos of nothing, not about the grain. He wrote to ask whether you were eating. He used me. He did. And then he tore a law out of a book so that he could not keep you. Tova turned her boot over and examined the sole of it with great attention. I have guarded that man since he was 19 years old, Warden. And in all that time I never once saw him do a thing that cost him anything. Not until you. In the 6th month, a letter came that was different. Orla, it said, you have made yourself clear and I have gone on writing anyway, which is only a slower way of taking something from you without asking. I will stop. I hope you are well. I hope the oven is warm. I will not write again. She read it 4 times. It was exactly what she had asked for. She had asked for it in a fortress hall in front of 400 people, and she had meant every word. And here it was, granted, in his own hand, without one word of complaint. So why did it feel like being robbed? He kept his word. No letters. Nothing at all. The fortnightly crown officer came and went and reported that His Majesty was well and busy and at the council, and Orla said good and went back to her ledgers and lit her oven every single morning for 411 people who did not need her bread, and at night she lay in the dark and pressed her hand flat against her own breastbone. Because the bond was still there, she had strangled it for 6 months. She had wrapped it and buried it and refused it. And it had not withered, and it had not gone, and every night it sat under her ribs like a coal that would not go out, warm and patient and shut. She was in the granary on the 12th day of the 8th month, counting sacks, when Merritt came in at a dead run with no coat on. Warden, breathe, the king. Merritt was gray. He's gone. Orla put down the tally stick. Gone where? That's Warden. That's the thing. Nobody knows. No horse gone from the fortress. No coin drawn. His sword still on the stand, and his crown's in the box. And there's a crown officer stood in your yard who has ridden 2 days without sleeping, and he says they have looked in every corner of Velmara and not found him. The granary was very cold and very quiet. How long? Orla said. 11 days. She was already moving. She was out of the granary and across the square, and she did not remember deciding to do any of it, and her hand had come up and pressed flat over her own breastbone over the coal that would not go out. There was one way in the world to find him. She had known it since the word gone. This is the job, she told herself, standing in the snow in the middle of her own square, with her eyes shut. He is the king, and I am his warden. And a missing king is a warden's business. It was a very good argument. It did not survive contact with the truth for as long as a breath. She opened the bond. It hit her like an oven door coming open. 6 months of banked heat, and behind it, faint and cold, and very close, a man. Orla's eyes flew open. He was in the valley. He was on her step. She came around the corner of her own house through the blowing snow at the 11th bell of the night, and there was a man leaning against her doorframe in a bad cloak, in a way that suggested the frame was doing most of the work, and he was soaked through to the bone. Orla stopped in the road. "You have to be joking," she said. He turned his head. Under the hood there was a jaw, and a mouth, and gray eyes, and about 11 days of beard, and a face gone so thin she felt it in her own stomach. "I am not begging," said Corvin of Vilmara. "You are standing on my step in a blizzard at the 11th bell. That is," he had to stop and breathe. "That is begging with extra steps. Yes, I remember." She got him inside. It took both of them. He made it to the hearthstone and sat down on it heavily, and steam began to lift off him at once, and Orla stood over him with her fists closed and her whole body shaking, and could not tell whether she wanted to hold him. 11 days, she said. "There are 300 men out looking for you. Tova is looking for you. Ironhold is looking for you. What in the world were you? 11 days! What? I have been in the valley 11 days. He was looking at the fire. "I have walked past this door 40 times. I have stood at the top of the road at night and watched the smoke come out of your chimney, and I have gone away again 40 times, Orla. I told you I would not write. I did not say anything about coming. You could have knocked." "No," said Corvin. "I could not. Because the last time I stood on this step I did not know who you were, and you gave me everything you had, and then I spent 2 months taking things from you without ever once asking, and I have thought about it every day for 6 months, and I have arrived at the following conclusion." He looked up. "I do not get to knock on that door. Not ever again. Not unless I have nothing. Not unless it is real." Orla stared at him. He was starving. She could see it now, in the light. The wrists, the hollows, the way he had come up her step. Corvin of Velmara, Alpha King, was starving in her kitchen in exactly the way she had been starving in it a year ago. And he had done it on purpose, and he had done it for 11 days. "You have not eaten," she said. "Not for a while." "You absolute," her voice broke. "You could have died, out there, for what? To make a point." "To be honest," said Corvin, "it was the only currency I had left." And then he reached into his coat and took out something wrapped in linen and unwrapped it with hands that were not working properly, and held it out to her. It was a piece of bread. It was black and hard as a stone and small enough to sit in the palm of his hand, and it was a year old, and Orla knew it. She had made it out of the sweepings of a flour bin and 3 handfuls of barley meal and water, and she had torn it in half on the worst night of her life, and she had given half of it away. "I ate the rest," he said. "That night. All of it. And I got as far as this, and I could not, and I have carried it since, in every coat I own, through 5 attempts on my life, and a treaty, and 6 months of not writing to you." He turned it over in his fingers. "It is the only thing anybody has ever given me for nothing. I could not eat it. I could not throw it away. I do not know what to do with it, Orla, and I have not known for a year, and I am very tired." Orla knelt down in front of him on her own kitchen floor. "I struck the claim," he said. "I meant it. You are not my wife, and I have no hold on you, and I have come up here with no crown, and no guard, and no coin, and nothing whatever to offer you, and I am going to ask you for something anyway, and it is not marriage." "Then what?" Corvin of Velmara looked at her with the whole of himself, unguarded, undefended, the bond blown wide open between them, and every single thing he felt came pouring through it into her, and there was no mask left anywhere in the man. "Feed me," he said, knowing. The oven ticked. "That is the whole of it," he said. "That is all I have. Last time you did not know what you were doing, and I have spent a year making certain that you could take it back, and now I am asking you to do it again on purpose. Bread from your hand. Because you want to." His voice failed him. "I am not asking you to be my queen. I have not the faintest idea how to be a king without you, but that is my problem, and I will manage it. I am asking you to feed a starving man who has walked past your door 40 times because he was too much of a coward to knock." Orla got up. She went to the sill and took down the loaf that was cooling there, the one she had baked that morning for 411 people who did not need it, and she brought it back, and she stood over him, with it in her 2 hands. And she thought about a girl of 11 in the back of a cart, learning that she was useful, and she thought, no. Ask me again tomorrow, said Orla Vane. Corvin's face broke. Tomorrow, she said, when you have slept and eaten and had a bath, which you need very badly, and when you can stand up without the wall, ask me then. And you will have to ask me again the day after that, because I am going to make you work. Corvin, I am going to make you work. Like nobody has ever worked in the history of this kingdom. And you will say yes, he breathed. I have not decided, said Orla. Ask me in the morning, and ask me the morning after that. Ask me every morning, until I have... And then the Alpha King of Velmara, who had spent 11 days in the snow of a valley he had once been accused of never visiting, tipped slowly sideways and went out, like a snuffed candle against her knee. Orla caught him. Of course, she caught him. She sat down on her own kitchen floor, with her hands in his wet hair and his head against her thigh, and the whole roaring, blazing, unguarded warmth of him pouring through the bond, and discovered that her face had done something it had not done in 6 months. And she broke the loaf and put a piece of it in his hand, so that it would be there when he woke. In the end, it took him 7 weeks. 7 weeks of asking, every single day, because she had told him to, and because it turned out that Corvin of Velmara, given a rule, was constitutionally incapable of doing anything but obeying it in the most exhausting way available. He asked her at dawn, on the granary steps, with flour on his hands. He asked at the council table until Tova threatened to resign in writing. He asked badly, on one knee, in a snowdrift, and got stuck, and had to be pulled out. He asked once with so many flowers that the mill house smelled like a funeral for a fortnight, and the school children staged a rebellion, and every day Orla told him to ask again tomorrow. And then, one perfectly ordinary morning in the spring, she was flouring a board in her own kitchen with the door open and the valley green outside, and he came and leaned on the frame the way he always did now and said, Orla, feed me. Knowing. And she said without looking up, yes. There was a very long silence. What? Said the king. You heard. The whole valley came out for it. 411 people, and a delegation from Ironhold with Lady Sennin at the head of it, looking insufferably pleased with herself and a crown officer who cried, and Merit, who cried harder. There were no vows. Orla had refused vows. Instead, in front of all of them, in the square where the granary had been sealed, the last baker in Ash Hollow tore a loaf of barley bread in half with her own hands, and gave 1/2 to the Alpha King of Velmara, and he ate it standing up in front of his entire kingdom. There, he said afterward, into her hair, it is done, and you knew exactly what you were doing this time, so you may never claim you were tricked into me. I invented the trick, said Orla. You gave your last loaf to a stranger. Best mistake I ever made, she said, and kissed him, and for once did not argue.